Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on India's national television channel Doordarshan about Indian foreign policy, India's international relations, and how India is contributing to make the world a better place. Viewers, this is a special episode where we are looking at the phenomenon that is remaking all aspects of life, digital public infrastructure, DPI. What is India's role in the development of DPI, both domestically and globally? And what are India's strengths in this field, and how is India helping to remake the global digital order? These are some of the questions we are taking up. And to discuss this, let me introduce you to a domain expert who's joining me in the studio, Dr. Mansi Kedia. Dr. Mansi Kedia is a senior fellow at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, ICRIER, a premier think tank of the country dealing with India's global engagement. Dr. Kedia, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
So, Dr. Kedia, we have DPI, and many people are actually puzzled by this concept. I mean, I'd like you, if you can start by just unpacking it for a lay person.
Sure.
What is this DPI? Because we all have a vague notion it has something to do with technology, with the internet, with governance, and with economic growth.
Yeah.
I mean, these are some of the,
Sure.
But how are they all connected, and why do we call it public infrastructure? How is it different from just, let's say, digital services or, products? I mean, why are we calling it public infrastructure? Let the audience know
Sure.
the basics first.
You got the keywords right. So I think it is complicated in the sense till the time you actually unpack it. I'll come to the public bit later, but you should think of digital public infrastructure as a broader digital system, which has key components of interoperability, use of open technology to the extent it can, so digital public goods. You should think of digital public infrastructure being able to deliver population scale services. And I think fourth and the most important is the innovation that it helps create. So there is a layer open to public sector as well as the private sector for innovation atop the DPIs. So there is no accepted definition. All the big institutions, including the Government of India and the G20 task force on DPI, have a working definition of DPI. And I think there is good reason to not obsess over the definition, but to consider and understand it as a system that has few key characteristics, and we will focus on those characteristics of interoperability, trying to use open technology, which is digital public goods, allowing and enabling innovation, and trying to think of population scale delivery of services. So in that context, it becomes different from a digital platform which has limited scope. Even a government digital platform, let's say if you were looking at passport e-seva, right? It has a limited purpose of processing your passport and keeping a record of where every individual citizen with a passport is traveling. It does not create more services on top, but digital public infrastructure, good example, which is Aadhaar and UPI, allow new services to be created on top of that. Aadhaar is not only used to verify my identity as Mansi, but it is used by my telecom company to give me a new mobile phone number. It is used by a bank to give me another service, etc., etc. So there are many services, and with the new, there is a very recent amendment that was made by UIDAI in terms of expanding the scope of services that Aadhaar could be used for. So there's a lot more that you can do with DPI than you can do with a digital platform or a digital service or how we initially understood as e-government services. Finally, to your point on public, it's the most confusing word actually, but so, for technologists, they think of public and they think of open technology that, so this is not proprietary owned technology by a single company, but it is public technology that is owned. For a lawyer, it's often thought of, this is government owned, but DPI may not necessarily be government owned. It depends on the application. And for economists, such as most of the people who work at ICRIER, it is thought of as a public good. But it's actually a combination of all of these three, and it manifests in different ways. But a good way to think about it is a technology system that allows for public value maximization. That is how most people who are working in this area are thinking about it. You want to create value for the public. You want to maximize value for the public through these digital systems.
So my understanding then is that it's basically a foundation out of which many services can be rendered, and many functions Right. So, I mean, we know physical infrastructure like roads, bridges, ports, power stations, railway. So, I suppose, and
it's similar.
It's similar.
Exactly. Like you create the road, and then you know that it's not just the access that you have created between 2 points, but you have also allowed for creating other sorts of infrastructure, such as the tourism industry, shops, other physical establishments like hotels, everything that comes along a highway. It's not just the road that is connecting two places. So, similarly, you can think of DPIs as well. It's not about the service of verification that Aadhaar serves, but many other things that can be built around it.
Right. Fair enough. I mean, that's infrastructure. So, Dr. Kedia, now we in India have been at the forefront in developing this for a vast, you spoke about scale.
Yeah.
And, 1.5 billion people, the kind of digitization that's happened through the Digital India under that rubric. You've been studying that closely and how it has contributed to India's economic rise and all those things. So the moot question here is, what kind of model does India bring? Because obviously DPI is not only being developed by us.
Yeah.
Every country around the world is making some effort or the other towards this.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously linked to the broader technological change in the contemporary times, right? So every country is trying to do this. So if you were to look at the Indian model, and let's say compare it to more powerful countries, China and the US, which are the so-called great powers, and they've invested much more resources and money into this, in developing the DPI. So how would you distinguish the Indian model from, say, that of China or the US? What is the guiding principle and the basis or the values and the objectives with which we have developed our DPI over the last decade or so?
I think one of the striking differences between these three countries, which is US, China, and India, I would say, is that the technology ecosystem in the US is very private sector driven. Like they do have their government systems, they have all of the rules, regulations, institutions that they need, but there is a free way and a lot of responsibility that makes the private sector the biggest drivers of the technology ecosystem in the US. China, on the other hand, is much more driven by the public sector. So the public sector itself invests, and that is why China has its walled gardens and all of the other, security strategic issues that are associated with China's digital economy, which is not something we are focusing on today. But I think India has a very unique model where they've tried to marry both, which is, this combination of public and private. And that's really classic of the digital public infrastructure approach, which is where the government is involved. The government has some accountability. The government is investing to some degree in infrastructure, but the private sector is coming alongside and filling the gaps where necessary. So you're trying to bring the best of public and private together. I'm not saying we've completely worked it out and there are no gaps in where we are in India today. But having said that, the approach is very unique in terms of combining the best of public and private, which is different from how I think US and China. So this is, we often in our research, if you've read ICRIER reports, you'll see we call it the third approach to digitalization, which is US being very private sector, China being more public sector, more closed, and India being a combination of the two. So,
yeah, in fact, Dr. Kedia, I like to call it, the Chinese model we call Big Brother, because they monitor and surveil their own population. They're also exporting this worldwide because of the authoritarian and the dictatorial approach to governance. And then the American we call a big tech, because it's all driven by the gigantic 4 or 5 big companies that monopolize everything. So I suppose we are neither of these, and we are, probably somewhere in the middle. And like you said, a mix of the two. And maybe we hope that, in India, our former foreign minister, Sushma Swaraj, used to say, we are not a big brother to anybody. We are only elder brother or elder sister.
Agree,
So that's probably our model. At least that's how we would like the world to know.
I completely agree. I would say very comfortably that's where India is right now, in terms of not only how it looks at the rest of the world, but also how it's looking at itself internally.
Right. So now, obviously we've done a lot domestically. Dr. Kedia, is, the rollout. We continue to bring out new applications, new services, and we keep announcing these. Now, for the rest of the world, there is also an expectation that this domestic success of India will also translate into how our DPI could potentially be adopted or transposed into other settings, which will benefit their local socio-economic and governance and other objectives. So on this front, we have been reading and hearing about many of our innovations and technologies which are transferable to other countries, and which many countries are now wanting to take into account while they develop their own infrastructure. So in that sense, we are kind of like providing a catalyst or a leadership or even a transfer of know-how and technology, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about that, and why has the world been so receptive to Indian DPI, and what is it that they are seeing? What is the advantage for them to study and to adapt or to take from us? And what is it about the Indian model that is attractive from their point of view? Let's say developing countries and also even some advanced countries.
No, great question, actually. I think it all started with India's G20, and it was, great thinking on part of the government to really take this idea to the rest of the world. And it was met with the people were suspect about the idea, what is it that India is trying to take, what is it that we are trying to show. But I think at some point, India was able to make a point that there is a third approach to digitalization, which is DPI. So the technology per se may have existed, I think, because we are not the only country with digital identities, we are not the only country with real-time payment systems or even data exchange systems. And there are examples from Estonia, Singapore, I mean, from the developed world where they have had these systems for a long time. I think the idea that it could be used in a way to scale financial inclusion services, direct benefit transfers at a scale that India was able to do is what was new. And to say that, look, this is how you can think of digitalization, and going forward also think of how aspects of it could be internationally integrated, is where this whole idea of what India's role is and where the developed and developing countries come into the picture. So India's digital identity, the underlying digital public good, which is MOSIP, on which Aadhaar has been designed, is now being adopted in at least, I think, 11 countries. I may have the numbers a bit off, but I think there are about 10 or 11 countries. And there are lots of good examples from Morocco, Philippines especially. They have also designed a direct benefit transfer system using this there. But if you, there is a very useful resource called the DPI map, which the UCL, which is the University College of London, has created. And there they found there were like about 100 plus countries with a digital identity, but a digital identity that was similar to what Aadhaar can do, the authentications and creating sectoral use cases. That's about 50-60 countries in the world, of which India is one. So for the countries where this doesn't exist, which is like a lot of the African nations, some your island nations in the Indo-Pacific, there's so many other countries where these examples could be used, but the economies of scale may not be there, like in the case of India, because we have 1.5 billion people, and you're looking at other nations which have like 1 million people. So it's a huge, so there are different challenges everywhere, but at least the idea has been made available and customizations will be necessary. The UPI integration has also happened with certain developed countries like France, UAE, Singapore, where even Sri Lanka, and I've actually tested UPI in Sri Lanka personally, so it was, it works, and it's really...
So it's our RuPay card or...
So the UPI app, you can take it to any store like a merchandise center or a vendor there, and their Lanka Pay, which is their digital app, digital payments app, is integrated with UPI. So I could use my UPI to pay through Lanka app, and the systems talk to each other. I'll come to the integration parts later, but I think there are larger economic gains. I mean, one is to just, build the idea that India has a real-time payment system which can get integrated globally. But there are certain, I guess, economic advantages, if not in the immediate term, in the longer term, depending on tourist destinations and your repatriation of funds that happen, that become a very solid use case. So, I think both from a developing country and a developed country perspective, these are... there is a lot that one can do with India's DPI.
Yeah, and what is surprising to me, Dr. Kedia, is Japan, France, a lot of these countries which are technologically have been historically more advanced than us, also see value in this. I mean, I remember Prime Minister Modi hosting President Macron in Jaipur, and he took him around the local markets in the Pink City, and he was actually showing President Macron, here is my phone, and here is how I make the use the Beam applications and make the payments, you
Yeah.
know. And whenever I travel around the world, people say that you've got everything on your phone and you
Yeah.
can actually solve most of your daily meet most of your daily needs just with using a phone. You don't need anything else. I mean, this is something, especially in the last 5 to 10
Yeah,
years, we've
yeah.
seen this come along in a big way, isn't it? And I think many people are surprised that India could do it also at low cost, you know, and that's another advantage, isn't it?
No, absolutely. It's so shocking even for our friends and family that visit from outside to find that it's just so easy here. They can't, they just cannot. And I think the CoWIN was another great example that had come up where because the legacy systems in developed countries are so solid that they probably didn't feel the need for these sort of digital interventions and digital services the way in which we felt it. So, there's a classic economic theory where they say that digital and communications infrastructure, the dividends from that is higher for developing countries because the infrastructure deficits or the traditional infrastructure deficits in those countries are higher. So the gains from digitalization, both productivity,
the baseline is
the baseline.
low.
So it's much easier and much higher for a developing country to gain from it. And also because, you're trying, because resources are constrained, you're doing patchwork, you're trying your best, and that's why it's low cost. And DeepSeek, everyone's been hearing about DeepSeek from China, and no one had thought that it was possible to produce it at like such low cost, like to have a foundational model at such low cost. So there is a lot of innovation that is possible, and the reason why it has happened in India is because there was a use case and wants to see that it can create so many spillover benefits. Forget about the direct service that we were trying to address, but even the other spillover benefits were so high that the scaling just kept happening. And obviously it comes with a lot of political will. Like, I don't think it would have happened on its own. It's not so easy to do it organically.
It's guided by the government.
It is guided by the government.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kedia, you already mentioned DeepSeek, and recently we co-hosted the AI Action Summit in France, and Prime Minister Modi mentioned that we are developing our own large language
large language models.
Language model in AI, and this is of course also closely linked with the notion of DPI. So please tell our audiences more about AI development and AI, our model, and what we are doing right now, and also whether we can also share this with other countries. And we've been hearing on many fronts, telecom, AI, there are many applied technological realms where we hear that many countries are eager to adopt or to learn from India. So let's talk about the AI, because it's the buzzword and everybody has a viewpoint on this. But as a national strategy, what are we doing with AI, and how is that potentially appealing to other countries?
So I think the AI strategy, it's complicated. It's also a complex problem for the government to solve because it requires, it's high capital cost. So it's, the resource choices have to be made very carefully. It's not easy, but India has a lot of natural advantages in terms of talent. It has a very well thriving IT services industry, which means that we're already, and a very thriving app economy, which means that we have a natural advantage when it comes to talent in terms of, using existing technology to create new applications and to create the use cases where the value is. Now, the key question comes in terms of the core technology and building foundational models, as was recently announced by the minister. That, it's always been like, should we do it? Should we not do it? We don't have one yet, but whether or not we will have it in the future it's possible. We are also making headway in that direction through India's AI mission. Now we have GPUs that have been committed to from the government through the India AI mission. So there is a lot that is happening. When and how soon it will happen, we don't know. But to me, I think India's role, and it also came out very well in the AI summit that happened in France, which the Prime Minister co-led, was that India's role in guiding governance of AI. AI is a technology that's not, technology is no more about how industries and businesses are going to use it to increase their productivity. It is really impacting, human life. It is impacting our national security. So there are lots of things that one needs to think about when you're thinking about AI. And the Prime Minister did emphasize a lot on governance. As a country with 1.5 billion people, we're also like the largest consumers of technologies, one of the largest consumers of technology. And therefore, and not only as individuals, even as our micro enterprises, small enterprises, you see a lot of big tech companies coming to India to work with people on use cases. Why are they doing that? Because they see that, this is a market. They're coming to work with governments, state governments, local governments, micro, small enterprises and individuals, because we can become the people who really shape how AI use is adopted.
The
and
norms
here,
and the standards.
The norms, the standards, the guidelines, the ethical considerations. And I think here is where India can actually take a leadership role, where there is actually, I think there's a gap here. Take countries along in terms of determining the future of how AI is governed, and how should designing happen, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, because these are very critical aspects of the technology. One is just creating and building the technology, but how does it really get diffused into the world is something that we want to be very responsible about. So while we are working on the supply side of the technology, which is, the model and the graphic processing units and the power and all of that, the data, which is another big part, we are also very large consumers of technology. And I think India certainly has a leadership role that it can play in that along with other countries.
Absolutely. Last question, Dr. Kedia, we are out of time almost, but why are we even sharing and offering to share with so many countries, and what is in it for us? I mean, this is a question. Technology, if you think about it as a very proprietary thing, why do we even give it away for free? I mean, people would want to know this because we are developing it, right? And our companies are doing it. For example, India Stack, one of the most successful, ingredients of our DPI. Now, it's done by our, techies and our companies which have all come together and made this happen, and there's so many useful applications. But why are we then saying it's open and it's inclusive and it's for everybody? And this is something closely linked to our ethos as well. So let's talk about this, because we seem to be doing it on a non-profit model, and we seem to be doing it for global good, and that's why we are saying it's global public goods, right?
Yeah.
And we are not charging a fee or any kind of we are not selling it, right? It seems to be, it's there for anyone who wants to take it. So what does that tell us about India, and why are we even doing it?
I traditionally, India has always been at least for the bigger technology solutions, we've always been takers of technology rather than givers of technology. And I think there is a sense of pride that is associated with taking your technology to the rest of the world. And therefore, I don't think the money becomes a consideration. Especially India developed it not it is. There's more strategic sense in taking this technology to the other countries than, keeping it, sitting inside the country and, holding on to it. And because it also creates an opportunity to build interoperable networks globally, especially in the finance space. There are so many use cases that even central banks are thinking about, the BIS is thinking about, on how payment systems can be brought together. How can you deal with global inefficiencies of international financial markets? So there's a lot more that can happen in the long run. In the short run, I think it's more about telling an India story to the rest of the world, that we have a place in this digital ecosystem that is evolving around the world. It's no longer just about the bigger powers or the powers that were thought to be the leaders. There is a story that India brings to the table. And this is one way to demonstrate it. But in the long run, there are a lot of economic gains that can come from this sort of integration and supply of technology, which is easily integratable.
Yeah, so presumably, like you said, if our RuPay system is operable everywhere, it eases tourism and trade and business.
Absolutely.
It also creates market opportunity. So it's not only philanthropy or altruism or doing good for the world. It also ultimately helps us to become a major financial power and an economic power in the world, isn't it?
It could. In the long run, I completely see it as an opportunity for better economic integration. If financial flows are smooth, if data flows are smooth through integrated data exchange systems, if identity programs can be used for better exchange of talent, there are so many things that one can do when systems are integrated. And I just want to highlight one more point here, that DPI integration, one is the technology integration part of it. The other important part of it is alignment on institutions and on legal systems, because that is where the real challenge happens. So if the UPI integration is happening at some level, the countries are also talking to each other in terms of what is permissible to flow and what is permissible not to flow. So that integration of the legal system, institutions and economic policy thinking is also equally important as much as the in fact, more important, I would say, than the technology. To me, technology is really the low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do. Some engineers will come together and fix it. The bigger decisions are in terms of how the policy thinking has to be aligned, right? So that is where I feel that conversation is already starting with conversations on integration of DPI. So yes, I mean, I think it has multiple benefits. It depends on how we choose to guide this whole thing, how we fix our systems within, how we can make the governance stronger and take people along. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So, viewers, this very informative discussion with Dr. Mansi Kedia, what we are learning is that India has advantages of size and scale, and therefore it's a producer of technology, also a consumer of technology, and that makes it a very powerful player in this space globally. But secondly, our ethos, our value systems, all these also matter, and they are enabling us to be a provider, a net provider of technology solutions to so many countries around the world, developing as well as developed. And this is a huge contribution that we are doing to global well-being and global economic growth and to global governance. So these are all major contributions, and of course, it's work in progress. There are many areas where we still need to improve and do better, but certainly we are showing our prowess in the digital realm. In shaping the global order also, Dr. Kedia was talking about norms and standards and principles and regimes that are being created to govern this whole evolving and fast evolving space. And if India is there at the outset shaping the norms, shaping the rules, then we will be in a stronger position. Our corporates and our businesses also gain from digital public infrastructure being globalized. And so it's both a case of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, our world is one family, but also a case of national interests being advanced as a result of this investment in digital public infrastructure. Let me thank Dr. Mansi Kedia for unpacking a rather complex subject for our viewers. Thank you so much for being with me.
Pleasure, absolutely. Thank you so much.
So viewers, digital public infrastructure is redefining all walks of life, as I said, and this is only going to become more fundamental to shaping the way the whole of humanity progresses. So for India to be there at the table, to be producing the technology, to be consuming the technology, and also to be a provider of solutions to problems, this is a big move, and this is something that in the long run will be a defining feature of India's rise in the world. So let's focus on digital public infrastructure and India's contributions. And like Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said, whatever we develop is actually for the whole of humanity. And so the world needs to be also taking note of India's progress in this field. And our doors are always open for the rest of the world to partake in our success. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care.